All right, peeps, this is Art, and it's time for the show. Let's be reasonable. Of course, we are into episode 4 of our 5-part expose into what is wrong with the right. And of course, if you missed episodes 1, 2, or 3, here's some of the highlights. In episode 1, we talked about the fact there are 5 factions that make up the Republican Party, and they're kind of being led around by the populist faction right now. However, I tell you, don't sleep on the conservative, or I would say Christian conservative group flag and whatever they call themselves, right? But anyway, that group is probably at the end of the day, underneath it all, truly running things. So that being said, make sure you understand how the 5 factions work and what they look like. In episode 2, we talked about supply side economics. It was important for us to understand what is the underpinning of the economic argument that Republicans use constantly. And of course, it is supply side economics. It is the ethos. It's the air they breathe. However, I will tell you, I did spend some time with a few Republicans over the weekend who really didn't even know anything about supply side economics. I must say, I found that kind of odd. Anyway, that's episode 2. In episode 3, we talked about the deficiencies that make up the Republican Party's supply side economics. In short, it creates deficits and, of course, then debt. It favors the individual above all else. And, that's what you kind of end up with when you favor the individual above all else, a bunch of debt and a bunch of deficits, right? Anyway, so that's episode 3. In episode 4, this is an important episode because it's at this point that, remember in episode 1, I told you that I believe their problem is rooted in economics. And the reason why I think it's rooted in economics is because, people who have wealth in most cases, they're not noisy. Okay. They're not noisy, but this particular group is extremely noisy. So that tells me something about, I guess I would say, and this is me personally, the wealth quotient, right? They have a tendency to be in everybody's business, telling them what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And again, I say this points to a lack of wealth. So let's check and see if that's true. And here's where we start to find out if, in fact, it is true. So, in episode 4, folks, we're dealing with an article, April 16, 2023. Dramatic realignment swings working class districts towards GOP. This is by Steph Knight. She is spending her time talking about the 118th congressional districts by median income. And remember, I guess it's a median income based on 2021 data, and of course the victory margin for the 2022 midterms. Remember this: those midterms were supposed to be dominated by Republicans, but it wasn't. But there's a reason for that. I'll get to that later. Okay, so in this piece, we're talking about income, right? And we're also talking about margin of victory. Let's start at the top in the quadrant number, let's say 2. We're dealing with incomes at about 150,000. We're talking about median incomes, right? Then we go down to 100,000, all the way down to 0. We see the margin of victory line. This is uh, our y-axis. No, our x-axis. Yeah, it's our x-axis. Math. Anyway, so this is our x-axis, and it kind of controls. I would say, really, my degree is in political science, right? So I'm going to tell you, based on how districts are gerrymandered today and how they are, the number of swing districts are shrinking steadily. Anything outside of a margin of 10 today is a truly safe district. I'm going to tell you, at 10, you start getting escape velocity, right? So anything less than 10 is a district worth fighting for, right? Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, and when you look at this, you'll see, there's a big concentration of Republican districts here. And then, of course, anything, this is plus 50. So these guys out here, I mean, safe as can be, right? Now, these guys here, up to about 10, which I believe is probably about right here. Um, these are probably safe districts, okay? All right. And the other way on the other side. So, but here's what I want to show you. So we know our districts, we know our income. They tell us in the quadrant one that Democrats represent wealthier districts. Down here in quadrant three, they tell us that Republicans represent less wealthy districts, right? So, and of course, at the bottom, I'm going to tell you between 0 to 50,000, you're going to see more Democrat districts here than you do Republican, right? Okay. In the 50 to 71,000 mark, you across the board, you see a good solid number of Democrat and Republican districts here. When you go above 71,000 to 100, you start to see more Democrat districts in this spot. And of course, going above 100,000 to 150,000, definitely more Democrat districts than you see Republican districts. So when it comes to wealth, as party, you see that once you get above 71,000, more Democrat prosperity than you do see Republican prosperity by district. And that's key. And I keep saying that's key because you have to remember that Republicans have controlled the maps at the state level and at the federal level for at least 3 election cycles. So I'm going back 3 census. Republicans have been in control of these maps. So that's important that you understand. Now, I want you to look at a couple things. Remember, the article is about these districts, a working class district swinging toward the GOP. And you have to remember that, and this is the Democrat side, right? There was a reason why Democrats did not want supply side economics. And the reason why they didn't want supply side economics in the 1970s or so was because it would wreck the Democrat Party. And why would it wreck the Democrat Party? Because a lot of the wealth that was created from the 1930s to the 1970s is what built the middle class income. And Democrats represented that middle class income. And a lot of those jobs that were representative of the Democrat Party at that time were union jobs. And those union jobs, guess where they are? Manufacturing jobs. Now, remember, think about supply side economics. Supply side economics, above it all, supply side economics says that we want to take these opportunities and create more supply. How do we do that? Well, we end up moving jobs outside of the United States, right? To where we can get it done cheaper. In other words, we can have more supply. That way we can drive down the cost and people will buy more. And that's kind of how that works. Now, there's the incentive component that goes along with that. Remember, because that's where the tax cuts were, that's where the spending cuts are, right? And that's where the deregulation lives, right? So all of these components comprise that umbrella of creating more supply, driving down the cost, right? But it affects union jobs. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that's what we saw from the 1980s going forward. I'll show you that in episode 5, just so you have some clarity to that. But really, when you look at manufacturing jobs at its peak, they represented somewhere around 19 million American jobs. And remember, during the 1970s, a third of all households were union jobs in the United States. So, a very impressive numbers. 19 million Americans out of union homes, working these union jobs, I should say. Right. Now, by the time you get to 2000, that number is down to like 16 million. And remember, supply side economics has shipped these jobs overseas in order to create more supply to drive down costs, right? To stimulate growth. All right. By the time you get to 2008, Union jobs represent, wow, I mean, like 4% of U.S. jobs nationwide, and some 13, or actually, by the time of the Great Recession, about 11 million manufacturing jobs. Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, that's supply side economics. That isn't, communists and socialists tearing up the system. That, ladies and gentlemen, is supply side economics. All right. Now, couple that with what we learned in the last episode about the bailouts. You're stripping away all of these jobs, and yet you're still bailing out everybody, right? Which is, I find that also strange too, because it's all about the individual until the corporation gets in trouble. I find that awful strange. You should too. All right, but back to this chart. Here's what I'm going to say here, and I'm coming up on the end here, so because we got a lot left in episode 5 that we need to talk about, but you need to understand the setup. Here's the setup. You have more wealth that's being created on the Democrat side than you do the Republican side. And why do I say that? It's because tax cuts, they favor people who have wealth. Therefore, it favors these Democrat districts than it does Republican districts, right? So, and for every Democrat district that is thinking about going over to the Republican side because you think they represent working class people, I'm here to remind you what happened to those union jobs once again because of supply side economics. So, following them is like, following the wolf who's dressed up in sheep's clothing, because that's exactly what will happen. Now, these people, I'm here to say, Democrats have cracked the code of supply side economics, a system that they really didn't even want, right? And it's hard to imagine how could this be the case that Republicans are less well off in a system that is designed around Republican ethos, supply side economics. How could that be the case? But it is. And it is this case because of two reasons. One, there's a lot of people on the Republican side that don't understand risk. And two, remember, they created these districts because of gerrymandering. Uh oh. Okay, on to episode 5.